My name is Mark. This is Zen Talk, and tonight we'll be asking the question, is Zen a cult? So, what is a cult? Generally speaking, something is called a cult when the beliefs or practices are outside of the mainstream norms of the religions of the culture you currently live in. In the United States, Buddhism and Zen, in some parts of the country, is accepted as mainstream, though in other parts it would definitely be considered a cult, possibly persecuted by the locals. So locally, what is and is not a cult may be subjective. The word cult is short for cultus, that means cultivation. The media has put a negative spin on the word, implying evil deeds and malicious intents. So, just to sum up what we're talking about here, a cult may be subjective to the location you are in. Yeah, so different states, different countries may or may not say that Zen is a cult or even Buddhism is a cult. Okay, so there are benign cults and destructive cults. Let's go to desktop only here. For example, the followers of St. Olaf, and this does not exist by the way, I made it up, have beliefs and practices that are not shared with the mainstream religions of the local population. However, they provide food banks, shelters for the homeless, and volunteer counseling for any who ask. The community benefits. The members of St. Olaf are peaceful, healthy, and overall happy. St. Olaf would be considered a benign cult. On the other hand, the followers of Holy Dove, who also have beliefs and practices not shared with the mainstream religions of the area, they isolate themselves from the general population. They use predatory, unethical means to finance the church. The members are violent when questioned or criticized, and overall the members are unhappy, nervous, and suspicious of others. Holy Dove would be considered a destructive cult. So, when we say the word cult, we need to ask the next question, well, what kind of cult are we talking about? Are we talking about a benign cult, which may be actually helpful in some way or doing good? Or are we talking about a destructive cult that is really just doing up to no good? All right. So, cult researchers, these are various people who have studied cults. This is a third party, and when a third party is asked to examine a group to determine if it's a destructive cult, they look for the following. 1. Isolation. Members are not allowed to associate with non-group members, or members are not allowed to read other materials that are not approved by the group. 2. Behavior and thought control. Members are convinced that if they leave the group that terrible things will happen to them, or members believe in the group and leader is infallible. And number 3, environmental control. Members are kept in a malnourished and sleep-deprived state, or members are using mind-altering drugs. These are generally 3 items that would indicate that if you could check them off, each one, that would indicate that perhaps the group is a destructive cult. So, is Zen then a destructive cult? The answer is, well, it depends. The Zen teachings themselves are not destructive. However, the methodology and ideals that the group holds may be destructive. I have visited some Zen centers and Buddhist organizations here in the United States that I would classify as a destructive cult. I have counseled many people who were involved in a destructive Zen cult here and abroad, and when I listened to them, their stories indicated that the group running the Zen center were employing destructive cult tactics. And this is something where you would have to say, okay, is it the teachings themselves are destructive, or is it the people that are destructive? And this is something, again, you have to look at when you evaluate a group. So you may be asking at this point, well, hey, I'm going to a Zen center, or I'm going to this Buddhist group. Am I in a destructive cult? And the answer, again, is it's hard to say if someone is in an evil cult, or if any particular group leader, if any particular group or leader is indeed using evil cult tactics. Only through interviews and examination of the group records can one make the case. And that can take quite some time, depending on how isolated the group is. For example, and this is from my own personal investigations, Trungpa Rinpoche, a radical Tibetan teacher, ran a destructive cult for years without any criticism or notice from the larger Tibetan Buddhist communities. It was only through interviews of the survivors of the Naropa Institute, and that was Trungpa's church that he ran, after Trungpa's death, did the truth of the horrors committed and the abuse come out. I personally listened to the stories of one survivor and was chilled to the bone as he spoke about the horrors and terrors that rained down on him and his group. And this is, like I said, it's very interesting how in the larger Tibetan Buddhist sense, how one particular school or teacher can be running a pretty hardcore evil cult, and nobody will say anything. And this can go on for years, like it did with the Naropa Institute, with nobody saying anything at all. People may hear rumors. Every now and then you might get an indication that something is not quite right, but the community fears for itself. They fear that if they call out Trungpa, that they themselves may be seen as in the same as Trungpa. So this is something that, it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of strength to bring somebody to task who may be doing bad things. Okay, it may only be Zen Buddhism in name. And this is something where the group is a cult or an evil cult, but they're using Zen and Buddhism in name only. There are some groups that loosely call themselves Buddhist or Zen. When one examines their teachings, one notices that the teacher has elevated themselves to a superior state of being through the fantastical claims they make. And this often is through their writings or their stories that they tell over and over again, that they will claim to have done deeds, or they claim to have been tested, or they claim to have achieved something or gained something. And there's absolutely no proof that this has ever happened. There's no documentation, and they have no witnesses. So typically the group leader will claim to be a Zen or Buddhist, or both, yet insisting that their own writings, lectures, or stories are equal or have surpassed the sutras and all of the spiritual writings. And you'll see this where the teacher will make a reference to the sutras or a particular sutra, and he'll talk about how great it is, but then he'll sort of brush it off and tell all the students that they don't need to read it. All they need to do is read his commentaries or her commentaries. I have seen this in quite a number of groups where the group itself has its own books. The teachers have their own books, and the students are encouraged to buy those books and not buy any other books. All right, so typically, go back to this here. So typically, when examining the teacher and the group, one can go down the destructive cult checklist with affirmations. So, like I said, when you start to really look at these groups that are in Zen in name only kind of groups, and you start to realize that they're using the names, the terms. They may even be using the forms and the costumes and everything else to look like they're Buddhist, to look like they're Zen. But when you start really looking into who they are, they have nothing to do with these at all. They're doing their own thing. The teachers are elevating themselves, and you can quickly find that out yourself by looking at what is their assumed end goal, and what are the students think the end goal is. All right. So let's talk about Zen, evolution, revolution, and Reformation, because it does happen, and sometimes these changes can be very, very difficult and called cults themselves. So having said all of this, what I've just said so far up to now, one has to keep in mind that the style of Zen as well as Buddhism does change as needed. Would have Lin Ji, the famous Chinese master of 800 AD, also Rinzai Zen in Japanese, have been accused of running a destructive cult with all of us shouting and hitting and harsh criticism of Chan in China? One has to ponder this question. I am sure that he would have been executed if he had been putting himself as the living flesh Buddha, and his entire works burnt, his followers killed. However, Lin Ji survived to become a minor school in Zen, the Southern School, if only because with examination of his criticisms were found to be valid, and his methods were to help others and not elevate himself. Lin Ji always claimed to be the man of no rank. He was not elevating himself or seeking riches. So this is sort of the movement, the revolution, the Reformation, is it towards elevating a person and riches, or is it something else? Is it taking a path, maybe trying to reform it to actually fit a culture that it's in? Or maybe it's a revolution where they're getting rid of corruption, or it's an evolution. Maybe they realize that there's been some missing pieces and now they're putting them in. So these are the things that one also has to keep in mind when evaluating any group as to whether it's a cult or a destructive cult or a benign cult. Okay, so sometimes you may be involved in a group or looking at a group, or you could have even been involved in a group for quite some time, and the organization itself is okay. It's not a destructive cult. There's nothing inherently about the makeup of the group that is bad, but sometimes it's just the people involved. There are evil people, psychopaths, sociopaths, or masochists. These are people who like to inflict pain on people, who show up at the Zen centers for their own designs and purpose. Sometimes these people endure themselves to the teacher, or take on a position of authority within the Zen center where they can inflict maximum torment on all those around them for their own emotional and psychological needs. This really is the definition of evil, to inflict torment for one's own emotional and psychological needs. And yes, there are people like that in the world. I hear about it all the time in the businesses and corporations, and you definitely find them in the Zen centers too. Sometimes such a person can be brought to account for their behavior openly to the members. Of course, this brings up quite a lot of drama, where the evil person departs angrily, blaming the members for their own bad behavior. Yes, they literally will blame the members for their bad behavior and saying that they were trying to help everybody. Or they appeal to the teacher to defend them in front of the entire membership. And I have seen this too, where the teacher literally had to come out and apologize for the bad behavior of the person and plead to the membership to give the person a second chance. As insane as that is, it happens more than you think. And the teacher often does the bidding of the evil person because they have been swooned by the evil person. You can almost say the teacher has been bespelled by the evil person. Sometimes it's just a group of the established students, a clique, if you will, that feel that they are entitled. And they will often interpret the teacher's lectures and talks to mean something totally different than what the teacher actually said. What is sad is when the teacher knows this is happening and does nothing. So this is a lot of pitfalls and traps that happen in the Zen centers. And I've visited enough Zen centers and talked to enough students to know that there's a lot of troubled people that get involved in the Zen centers. There's a lot of people that are just, I would call evil persons that get involved. And they create quite the mess. And unfortunately, the teacher sometimes it escapes them. This is not what they signed up for. They were there to just wanting to run a Zen center to help people. But when these kind of evil people come in and try to take charge, and things just escape, and it happens. It happens a lot. Sometimes I have heard of Zen centers closing because of these problems. I have heard of teachers leaving the Zen center for rather ambiguous statement reasons. This has happened. All right. So why would anybody now want to stay in a group where bad things are happening or around evil people? And I would say it's FOMO. FOMO means the fear of missing out, and it's a big reason why people tolerate badly behaving people. You see this all the time in the workplace, but you see this a lot in the religion, because they fear they may miss something that will bring them to the state of enlightenment. Oh yes. People will run and they will do anything to sit at the master's feet because they fear they may miss something that will bring them to the state of enlightenment. Yes, I know it's a silly notion, but the fear is very real and powerful for so many, and that is why these destructive cults flourish. And these evil people get away with these very evil deeds that they do. In the end, it's always your choice. You have to ask yourself what benefit there is for staying with evil people or with a group that is going down the destructive cult path. So these are questions that you need to constantly be asking yourself. And I would say always evaluating the group and the teacher, and be vigilant. All right. Thank you very much. And please remember to like and subscribe.